few weeks ago, actually 3 weeks ago, Rana and I took our family to Universal Studios in Florida for the first time. And we were excited about it. Actually, we started planning for it and talking about it last year. So it was a long time in the planning. But when we were talking to the kids about maybe what we might possibly do for a vacation this year, we struggled with, okay, what are we going to do? What can we afford to do? And, we brought this up to the kids as well. Is this something that you want to do? And they were excited, of course, about the idea. But we shared, well, if this is something that you really want to do, it can only happen if you're willing to actually make sacrifices for it. That it's going to cost not just mommy and daddy something, but it's going to cost you something too. And so we said, if you really want to do this, we can work on this together as a family, but it's going to entail that all of us make sacrifices. No going out to eat, which we really don't do a whole lot of anyway. But we're also going to just spend money on the bare essentials, cut everywhere that we can, and also look for. We scoured the house for things that all of us could sell to raise money. We got a flower vase for the family, and we put it in the kitchen, and this was our vacation fund. And the kids, scoured the house for loose change. They searched our cars and the cushions, and we sold many things throughout the house, and that we could use to raise some money. And everyone participated and contributed to this mission. Everyone made sacrifices. Everyone played a role in this mission that we were working on together as a family. And it was a blessing to see us come together towards that common goal, that common mission, and to see how excited the kids were, especially Ethan. He kept us all accountable. We'd go to the grocery store, or we'd go to any store, and he'd say, "No, we don't need that. We were saving for vacation. Put that back." Especially with Ron, he'd say, "Mommy, put that back on the shelf." And it was really funny because he was intense and excited and focused on building up this savings for us to be able to go. And it's you might say, well, wait a minute, that's terrible parenting to force them to give. What money do they have? Neither one of them obviously have a steady income or any income at all. They don't even get allowances. So what they get is what's given to them for various things. They saved money from birthdays, from Christmas, from various chores and other things, and didn't force them to give any amounts, but it was an expectation that they were going to play a role in accomplishing this family mission together. And by their own free will choice, they emptied out their piggy banks in this vacation fund, and they were excited about it. Had a countdown to vacation. They all played a role, an active role, in making this possible. And it was a blessing to have this family mission that we were working on together, and to see that it wasn't. You might say, well, really, Rana and I could have just figured that out between the two of us. Why did we need what little they had to participate in and contribute towards that? Well, it mattered to me and to Rana because we wanted to involve them in the family work. We wanted to involve them, for them to see and experience what it's like to work towards something together, towards a common goal, and to be a contributing part of of our family. So it was a blessing for all of us to be able to do. And maybe you've seen this in other areas of life, where maybe you've seen someone who was given something that cost them nothing. Maybe someone bought them a car or paid for their education or some big lavish gift, and maybe they didn't value it because it cost nothing. But when we've had to actually play a role in saving up for and making sacrifices for to accomplish a common mission, it means something to us. And this was certainly the case for us in this family vacation. But it's incredible to stop and think for a moment to realize the God of all creation, the God who lacks nothing, who needs nothing, who has everything at his disposal, all powerful, all knowing, he's ever present, he's eternal. He doesn't need what little I have, but that he values and loves you and I enough to say, I want you to be involved in what I'm involved in. I want you to care about what I care about. I want my mission to be your mission. And that he doesn't just say, okay, come to know the truth, but then sit back on the bleachers and watch Daddy work. He says, come, join in on the family business, join in on this family mission of going out and making disciples of all nations. He calls us and invites us into what matters to him. That is the God that we serve. And when we might feel like we have nothing really of value to contribute. Maybe I'm not very skillful. I don't have very much money. Maybe you just feel like you are not worthy of that. But God values you enough to say, I want you to be a contributing member of this family, to play an active role in it. He wants us to be more consumed with building his kingdom than we are in protecting ours. And Dolores referred to the scenario in Luke 21 with the widow. And so I actually want to look at that verse, a couple of verses there in 21. We're going to start in verse 1. As he looked up, Jesus saw the rich putting their gifts into the temple treasury. He also saw a poor widow put in 2 very small copper coins. I tell you the truth, he said. This poor widow has put in more than all the others. All these people gave their gifts out of their wealth, but she gave out of her poverty. Out of her poverty, she put in all she had to live on. Well, notice here that Jesus doesn't say, you know what, tithing's not for you. You don't get to participate in my work. You don't get to contribute because you don't really have anything valuable to give. He doesn't say those 2 little coins, that's not going to make a difference. No, actually the opposite. He says her gift is of greater value than the much larger gifts of the wealthy who gave out of their wealth. That she gave more, that her gift was a greater value because she gave from her heart. And Jesus affirms the value of that gift regardless of the dollar amount. But he gives value to her rather than saying, you know what, tithing, that's a spiritual discipline for the people who are wealthy. That's just for the people who are well off. That's not how Jesus responds. He doesn't dig in and grab her coins and give them back to her and say, no, you can't do this. Rather, he values that contribution and says it's worth more. Again, sometimes we may feel like all I have are these 2 coins. They won't make much of a difference. They won't make much of a splash or much of an impact for God's kingdom. Or like that boy who only has 2 small fish and 5 small loaves of bread. He may feel like what I have, this lunch, is insignificant compared to the vast sea of thousands of people who are hungry surrounding me. What difference could this possibly make? When Jesus sees that little gift and he feeds the multitudes with the little that boy has. He doesn't say, I got this. Hold on to that lunch because you don't have much to contribute. Jesus says to give to him, to entrust to him in order that he can use what little this boy had to do big things. And that what is small and insignificant in my hands that I might try to grasp and not want to let go of, it is of so much more value in God's hands. He's able to do big things with my little fish, big things with my little coins. We serve the God who is capable of and has a history of doing big, amazing works through the seemingly insignificant. That is the God that we serve. I recently heard this quote, and I don't know where it comes from, but that struck me, that God and I can do more with $9 than I can do with $10 on my own. God and I can do more with $9 than I can do with $10 on my own. And it's that same idea that when I put a portion of what I have, what God has already given me, when I put it in his hands and say, God, I trust you with what you've given me. I trust you with what I have, what's at my disposal. I trust you even when it's hard to. Would you multiply it as you are the God who multiplies? Would you multiply it as these fish and bread? Would you bless it and use it for your kingdom to do things that I could not do by holding on to that and refusing to contribute towards the family mission? But you may be this morning asking, what in the world does this have to do with the sermon series we've been going through? In fact, it's funny, I don't usually tell Rana beforehand what I'm going to preach on. I kind of like to surprise, even though I post on Facebook a lot of times midweek what the sermon message will be, and it's posted on the sign out front. Thank you, Danielle. But I don't usually tell her what I'm going to preach on, but she saw me working on this and said, wait, you're talking about giving? And she said, is this the same sermon series, or are you starting a new one? And it's funny because we don't normally think of giving, we don't normally think of tithing as having anything to do with our spiritual health, as having anything to do with our spiritual growth. We normally just think of that as, it's just one of those things that God, he wants us to do. It's a good idea to do. It's one of those things that, check boxes that we're supposed to do. But maybe I can find other ways to get around that. And I don't really want to, that's not for me. Again, that's for the people who have lots of money and more that they know what to do with. They say, I don't know what to do with all this money. I guess I'll give some to the church. But we don't normally think of tithing in relation to our spiritual health and growth. But what we find is that when we start to, actually I'm going to take a step back. A couple of months ago, we talked about what it means for us to serve and follow the generous God, the only God, and who is so generous we cannot possibly outgive him, and that we are called to reflect his character, to reflect his heart, and reflect what matters to him in our hearts and lives. So we looked at this idea of giving from the perspective of faithfully reflecting who he is. Well, this morning we're picking up on this, but looking at it from the perspective of when we do reflect his generosity, when we reflect his heart, when we're on his mission with him as a participant, not as an observer, God grows us. He changes us. He aligns our hearts with his, to where I start to care about what he cares about. And he changes what matters to us, and he grows our relationship with him. So absolutely, our willingness to follow him in what he calls us to trust him with our treasure. And he calls us to be faithful in bringing our tithes and offerings into his storehouse. It does absolutely play a role in our relationship with him. Continuing on in Matthew chapter 6, we're going to turn to verse 19. Jesus says, "Do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moth and rust destroy, but store up for yourselves treasure in heaven, where moth and rust do not destroy, where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also." For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. So Jesus is telling his disciples, telling his followers that they are to be more focused on building his kingdom than they are, again, about protecting their own. His kingdom is eternal, and so when we invest in his kingdom, we're investing in the things that last. We don't get to take anything from this earth with us into heaven. Scripture says that we came in naked, and naked we will go, that we don't take anything with us except that when we invest in God's mission, when we invest in his kingdom, when we reflect who he is, his truth, his holiness, his love, his grace, his generosity, when we live out faithfully in these ways, that we will also find that we are bringing people with us into eternity. We can't bring this stuff, but we can play a role in other people's lives for them to join us in eternity and to invest in the things that matter, that last, that are eternal, rather than being so consumed on the here and now, the temporary treasures of this world. And make no mistake, we all have treasure. It may feel like, I don't even know what that means. I think of treasure, and I think of pirates and storybooks, but I don't have any treasure. But we all have some things at our disposal. Our time, our energy, our stuff. We all have some sort of income coming in, regardless of what that looks like or where it comes from or what that amount is, that God has entrusted something to our care, and how we choose to invest that, how we choose to utilize that is either for our kingdom or for his. And he's called us to invest in his kingdom. And Jesus says that where our treasure is, there our heart is also. And there is absolutely the sense in which where we spend our treasure reflects where our heart is and what matters to us. It reflects our priorities, our focus, it reflects what's important to us. But there's also beyond that a sense in which it also reflects. It not only reflects our heart, but it also guides and directs our heart as well. That our heart follows when we choose to, like my kids, choose to make these sacrifices, choose to be an active, participating member of the family and say, I want to give, to see my money that won't last, that will rust and be rotted and moths will eat, this temporary stuff I can convert into what will last for eternity, and that is invest into God's kingdom, into his kingdom work. And so our treasure reflects our heart, but it also guides and directs us as well. As we give, it aligns, as I've said, our hearts and our priorities with God's. It sends us out on his mission, because he hasn't just called us to know the truth, to believe the truth. He hasn't just called us to subscribe to his ideology, to his morality, but he's actually called us into join his mission, to join his work. Not because he can't do it without us, not because we're so good and amazing and have such great treasure that, God is just really hoping that we will contribute, otherwise he can't do it. But no, he wants and has called us to be aligned with him, to share his heart, to be on his mission with him. And yes, where and how we invest what he has given us does play a role in that, to grow and challenge us. There's also a sense in which, giving and living generously and reflecting God's generosity, it does grow us and align us with our hearts with his, but it also will protect us from various sins and temptations that seek to destroy us and seek to limit our impact for God's kingdom. And that includes the sins of selfishness, of pride, of greed, of apathy, and that as we give and as we are faithful in representing God's heart and joining his mission, that it protects us from these sins, from these temptations. And continuing in Matthew 6:24, Jesus says, "No one can serve two masters. Either he will hate one and love the other, or he will be devoted to one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money." And so if Jesus is Lord of our lives, that means that I cannot be also Lord of my life. That there can't be any competing affections in my heart. That if he is Lord, that means that that it's about his mission, his work, what matters to him over and above what I want. And in selfishness, we can tend to fall into being focused on what I want or what I prefer, or on taking care of number one, while neglecting what God has called us to and what matters to him. But to seek him as Lord of our lives with no competing masters, that we can't both love money and love him. Continuing on, verse 33, "But seek first his kingdom and seek first his righteousness, and all these things will be given to you as well." In what sense are we seeking his kingdom first if we say, you know what, I'm going to let others do the work. I'm going to let others contribute and fund the work of the church. You see, I would much rather have a church in which the budget is funded by a lot of very small gifts, rather than by 2 or 3 generous, wealthy members of the church. Why is that? Because we grow as we give. Because it matters when our hearts follow, as we are faithful in reflecting his generosity, as we decide that his mission matters enough that we will actually decide to make sacrifices to see his mission carried forward. And seek first his kingdom. And we can't do that when we just say, okay, I'll throw some leftover scraps in from time to time. But when I take it right off the top and say, God, you are number one. Here is 1/10 of my gross income of all that came in. Not because you need it, not because I have to, and you're twisting my arm, or I want to look or feel more spiritual, but rather that I want to play a role. See, one of the things that I love, that Ethan and Kinsley, and that whole process of saving up for that vacation, never once did they say, what's the minimum that I can contribute to this? Never once did they say, what's the smallest amount that I can contribute and give and still be okay with you? No, they were so excited to see what they had to actually go towards this fun mission that we had together. And isn't that how it should be with us and God? That God, I love to see you work through these hands, to hear your words through my voice, to see you do amazing, eternally impacting work through the little things that I have. It is such a blessing to be involved in that God has called us and gifted us to be active members of his family. It also reminds us of where it all comes from. So it helps to, it helps in relation to fight the temptation and sin of selfishness, but also with greed and selfishness and apathy as well. And it reminds us of where it all comes from, that everything that we have, just like Ethan and Kinsley, everything they have has been given to them. But yet they still contributed. In Ecclesiastes 5:10 and 11, it says, "Whoever loves money never has money enough. Whoever loves wealth is never satisfied with his income. This too is meaningless. As goods increase, so do those who consume them, and what benefit are they to the owner except to feast his eyes on them?" Likewise, in the New Testament, the author of Hebrews in 13:5 says, "Keep your lives free from the love of money, and be content with what you have, because God has said, 'Never will I leave you, nor will I forsake you.'" See, greed is the polar opposite of generosity, of hoarding to ourselves and being focused on what we want and what we need, and refusing to be open to what's breaking God's heart in the lives of those around us, the needs around us. And people can tend to think that greed is something that, okay, only wealthy people struggle with that, right? Or they might, but you realize you can have greed, you can struggle with greed, or you can be generous regardless of your income. There have been times in my life where there was a time in my life where my mom was in a difficult place financially, and I was in college, but I was also working. And when I went over to visit her, she would pull from her cupboards food to give to me. And my income was much more than hers. She needed it more than I did, and it broke my heart, but it mattered so much to her to be able to contribute to me, and to see that you can have so little and be generous and not have any greed, or you could have great wealth and struggle and wrestle with greed. It's not something that is only a temptation for those who have wealth. You might think, well, if only I made this much, then I could faithfully tithe. But as your income grows, so do your expenditures as well. Coming from the banking world, I heard that all the time. When I make this much, then I'll save. When I make this much, then I'll start to think about retirement. Well, as your income grows, those priorities don't change on their own. And so is the case where when we say, "God, I will be faithful with what you give me, regardless of how much it is," the great thing about a percentage is a percentage of a small amount is a very small amount. The percentage of a large number is a much larger number. And so the person over here who doesn't have much income might say, well, it's easy for the wealthy to give 10% because they have so much. But then the wealthy could say, well, it's easier for the person without much income to give because that percentage is such a small number. And so we can look to the others and say, well, it's easier for that person, as a reason why we just don't prioritize putting God's kingdom first. But he's called us all to be invested in his work and his mission. So investing in his mission, it grows our faith, our trust. There are times when that check is harder to drop in that offering plate than others. But God promises to be faithful when we are faithful and when we rely on him and depend on him. Also, it unites us as the family of God when we're on his mission together. just as I referenced with Ethan and Kinsley and Rana and I, that being on that common mission and being in that work together, each making sacrifices. We all gave different amounts, but we were all in it together, and that united us together. Same thing in the church, that when we're on that mission together, it brings us in unity. There are two quick things I want to say about what tithing is not that are often misunderstood. Tithing is not about your relationship with the pastor or your status with the pastor or with the board or with the treasurer or with anyone else in the church. Your tithe has nothing to do with me. I've heard people say, well, that pastor upset me, so I cut my tithe, or I stopped tithing, or that treasurer, that board member, or that group of the board upset me or hurt me, or they didn't make this change that I wanted, or they made this change that I didn't like. And so I decided that the way I was going to voice that or respond to that was by not tithing. But here's the truth. Your tithe is not to me. It's not about your relationship with me. It's about your relationship with Jesus. It cannot be about me. And don't let any person be the reason why you are not faithful to Jesus. Likewise, tithe is not about earning the right or buying the right to get your way. To say, well, I tithe more than that person, so my opinion matters more. So my way, what I prefer, what I want should hold more weight because of the amount that I give. That is not what tithing is or how it works. It is not about getting my way. It is about Jesus getting his way. Having his way with me, having his way with what he's blessed me with. It is about Jesus and only about Jesus. It cannot be about anyone else, certainly not about me. Lastly, this morning, I just want to say, if you're not a follower of Jesus, if you're just kind of figuring out where you're at and what you believe, if you're maybe even just checking out this church and saying, I'm not sure if this is my home church or not, maybe you're watching the live stream or the recording after and saying, I'm just kind of checking this place out. And let me just say, if you're in any of those groups, I am not asking or expecting you to financially support the mission of this church here at Wintergreen Ledges Church of God. So when the offering plates pass, there's no pressure, there's no expectation. If this is not your home church, there's no expectation or ask that you financially support the mission of this church. But if this is your family, if this is your home church, then we are to be about that mission together, on that mission together, contributing what we have to offer in our talents, in our abilities, in our experiences, in the gifts that God's given us, and yes, in our finances as well. And that as we do that together, we'll experience unity, we will grow together. And so I want to ask and challenge you to test God in this. He, in Scripture, actually says to test me in this. To faithfully give and trust. Not from the leftover scraps, but your first fruits. And so, let's pursue God's mission together as united, contributing, active members. If this is your home church, let's do this mission together. Thank you. Would you bow with me as I pray? Lord, we come before you and we thank you for valuing us so much that you want us to contribute, to be a part of what you're doing, to be a part of what you want to do. Would you break our hearts for the things that break yours, for the people who are lost around this community, in this community around us? Would you break our hearts so much that we actually do something about it, and how we live and how we reflect you and who you are, and that we put you first to the extent that we're willing to contribute and may even make sacrifices for the things that matter to you and that you have called us to. And Lord, as we do that, as we step out in faith, would you bless the gifts that we give back to you? Would you multiply them as you did the fish and the bread? Because we know and trust that you are the God who is capable of doing big things through little people and little gifts given with a big heart. It is in your name that we pray. Amen.